When a loyal German shepherd appears at a wealthy Charleston estate, he becomes the unexpected hero who exposes a son's betrayal of his wheelchair-bound father and uncovers a 20-year family mystery. Hit subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. Magnolia Estate stood like a testament to Southern prosperity on the outskirts of Charleston, South Carolina. The imposing antebellum mansion, with its towering white columns and sprawling veranda, had been in the Montgomery family for 5 generations. The scent of jasmine and honeysuckle perfumed the air, carried by gentle breezes that rustled through the ancient live oaks draped with Spanish moss. Inside these grand walls, however, the atmosphere had grown as cold as a January frost. William Montgomery Sr., once the formidable textile magnate whose mills had employed half the county, now sat confined to a wheelchair, his once commanding frame diminished by a massive stroke 6 months prior. At 78, his silver hair remained thick, and his ice-blue eyes still held the sharp intelligence that had built his empire, but his body had betrayed him, leaving him dependent on others for the most basic needs. "For God's sake, can't you even hold your own damn cup?" Carter Montgomery's voice cut through the morning quiet of the sunroom. Tall and impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit, the 42-year-old son looked every bit the successful businessman his father had raised him to be. But the contempt twisting his handsome features revealed something his Harvard MBA couldn't mask: a profound lack of compassion. William's hand trembled as tea spilled onto the imported Persian rug. He tried to form words, but they came out garbled, his speech affected by the stroke. "I am sorry," he managed, his proud eyes downcast. "Sorry doesn't replace a $10,000 rug," Carter snapped, roughly repositioning his father's wheelchair with such force that the older man winced. "Jesus Christ, Dad. This is what we pay Marlene for." Marlene. From the kitchen doorway, Marlene Jackson appeared, a slender black woman in her 60s who had served the Montgomery household for over 30 years. Her kind face remained carefully neutral, but her eyes flashed with barely concealed anger. "Yes, Mr. Carter?" she asked, her voice steady despite witnessing yet another of the younger Montgomery's outbursts. "Clean this mess up. And for heaven's sake, don't let him handle anything else without supervision. It's like dealing with a toddler." Carter didn't even look at Marlene as he spoke, checking his Rolex instead. "I've got a board meeting at 9. The quarterly reports are on my desk. Make sure they're on Father's desk by this afternoon. He can at least pretend to read them before I file them." "Yes, sir," Marlene replied, kneeling to blot the spilled tea. As Carter strode out, she gently touched William's trembling hand. "Don't you mind him, Mr. William. You're doing just fine." William's eyes filled with tears he refused to shed. He wasn't always this way," he whispered, the words coming with great effort. Marlene nodded. "I know, sir. I remember when that boy would follow you around like your shadow, begging to learn everything about the business." She helped him with a fresh cup of tea, this time with a straw. Something changed in him. "Power," William managed, his gaze drifting to the window overlooking the estate's gardens. And agreed. Outside, the sprawling property stretched for acres, manicured lawns, rose gardens, and beyond them, the pecan orchards that had been his grandfather's pride. In the distance, beyond the wrought iron fence, William caught a glimpse of something moving, something large and gray. For a moment, his heart lifted at this small distraction from his grim reality. That evening, as Marlene helped William into bed, she hesitated at the doorway. "Mr. William, I've been meaning to tell you something." Her fingers twisted nervously in her apron. "Mr. Carter, he's been meeting with the board without you, and I overheard him talking about moving you to Pinewood Estates." William's face paled. Pinewood was a nursing facility 3 counties away, known for its isolation rather than its quality of care. "He can't," William said, momentarily forgetting his stutter in his shock. "This is my home." Marlene nodded sadly. "I know, sir. But since Mrs. Montgomery passed, and with Miss Elizabeth gone these past 15 years. She didn't finish the thought. They both knew that Carter now held all the power, legal, financial, and physical. As she turned out the lights, William stared at the ceiling, the weight of his vulnerability crushing him more than his physical disabilities ever could. His own son, the boy he had raised and groomed to take over the Montgomery legacy, now saw him as nothing but an obstacle to be removed. Outside, Unseen in the gathering dusk, a pair of intelligent eyes watched the mansion from beyond the fence. A majestic German shepherd, thin from weeks of wandering, but dignified nonetheless. Something about this place had drawn him here, some instinct he couldn't explain. The dog settled into the tall grass, watching and waiting as the lights of Magnolia Estate winked out one by one. The late April sun beat down on the gardens of Magnolia Estate, unusually warm for spring in Charleston. William Montgomery sat in his wheelchair beneath the shade of a century-old magnolia tree, its creamy white blossoms perfuming the air. These solitary afternoons in the garden had become his only respite, brief escapes from the suffocating confines of the mansion that had once been his kingdom. "What the hell do you think you're doing out here alone?" Carter's voice shattered the peaceful moment as he strode across the lawn, his Italian loafers crushing the tender grass. "You could fall, and then we'd have another medical disaster on our hands." William's gnarled fingers gripped the armrests of his wheelchair. "I needed air," he managed, hating how his once commanding voice now trembled and caught on simple words. Carter ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, exasperation evident in every movement. "That's what windows are for, Dad. Christ, you're impossible." He grabbed the handles of the wheelchair and spun it roughly toward the house. "The investors from Atlanta will be here in an hour. I need you cleaned up and in the study. Try to look competent for once." "My C Company," William protested, attempting to stop the wheelchair with his weak hands. "I should see the P proposals first." Carter's laugh was sharp and cruel. "Your company? That's rich. Montgomery Textiles hasn't been your company since you signed over operational control. Or did that stroke scramble your memory too?" He leaned down, his face inches from his father's. "Let me remind you, I make the decisions now. You're just a figurehead we wheel out when tradition demands it." The words cut deeper than any physical blow. William felt his chest tighten, not from another stroke, but from a crushing grief. When had his son become this monster? Was it his own fault for spoiling the boy, for giving him everything without teaching him the value of compassion? "You're hurting me," William gasped as Carter's fingers dug into his shoulder while adjusting the wheelchair. "Don't be dramatic," Carter snapped. "Just another excuse for attention. Like mother, always playing the victim." Something in William snapped. With more strength than he'd shown in months, he knocked Carter's hand away. "Don't speak of her." Carter's face darkened with rage. He gripped the wheelchair arms, leaning in menacingly. "Listen to me, old man. One more embarrassing outburst, and I'll have you in Pinewood before sunset. No more Marlene, no more gardens. Just you and strangers who couldn't care less if you live or die." The threat hung in the air, poisonous and real. William's eyes filled with tears of frustration and fear, emotions a Montgomery man was never supposed to show. That's when they heard it, a deep, thunderous bark that seemed to vibrate the very air around them. Both men turned toward the sound. Standing just inside the garden gate was the largest German shepherd William had ever seen. The dog's coat was a rich mix of black and tan, dulled somewhat by dirt and the hardship of life on the streets. But his posture was regal, almost imperial. His amber eyes, intelligent and assessing, were fixed on the tableau before him, the elderly man in the wheelchair and the younger man looming threateningly above him. "What the hell?" Carter straightened up, startled. "How did that mutt get in here?" The dog took 3 measured steps forward, another rumbling growl emanating from deep in his chest. There was no foam at his mouth, no sign of rabies or mindless aggression, just a deliberate, purposeful advance. "Get Marlene," William said, unable to tear his eyes from the magnificent animal. "I'm not getting anyone. I'm getting rid of this thing before it attacks someone." Carter reached for a garden stake leaning against a nearby bench. The moment Carter moved, the dog reacted. With astonishing speed, the German shepherd bounded forward, positioning himself directly between William's wheelchair and Carter. He didn't lunge or snap. He simply stood there, a living barrier, his posture clearly communicating, "You will not harm this man." From the kitchen doorway, Marlene watched in stunned silence, a tray of iced tea forgotten in her hands. She had witnessed enough of Carter's episodes with his father to understand exactly what the dog was doing. "Mr. Carter," she called out, finding her voice. "Please step away slowly. Don't antagonize him." Carter's face flushed with anger. "It's a stray, Marlene. Call animal control." He raised the stake slightly. The dog's ears flattened, and a low, warning growl rumbled from his throat. No. William's voice came out clearer than it had in months, the single word hanging in the garden air. He extended a trembling hand toward the dog. He's protecting me. The German Shepherd's ears perked up at William's voice. Without taking his eyes off Carter, the dog backed up until he felt the gentle touch of the old man's fingers against his fur. Only then did he allow his posture to relax slightly, though his watchful gaze never left Carter. This is ridiculous, Carter spat. It's a filthy stray, probably diseased. William's hand now rested fully on the dog's back, feeling the strong muscles beneath the matted fur. Something passed between man and animal in that moment. A connection, an understanding. He stays, William said, his determination momentarily overcoming his speech impediment. What? Carter's voice rose in disbelief. The dog stays. William looked up at his son with newfound strength in his pale blue eyes. Unless you want to. Explain to the Atlanta investors why you're arguing with an old man about a dog. Carter checked his watch and cursed under his breath. Fine, but it stays outside. And tomorrow, it's gone. He threw down the steak and stalked toward the house, turning back only once to point a warning finger. This isn't over. As Carter disappeared into the mansion, Marlene approached cautiously, setting the tray on a nearby table. My goodness, Mr. William, she whispered, eyeing the dog with wonder. Where did he come from? William's fingers gently stroked the German Shepherd's ear. The dog had fully relaxed now, sitting protectively beside the wheelchair, his intelligent eyes scanning the garden as if assessing potential threats. Heaven, William replied softly. I think he came from heaven. As if understanding, the dog turned to look at William, their eyes meeting in silent communion. For the first time in months, William Montgomery smiled. The morning light filtered through lace curtains, casting delicate patterns across William Montgomery's bedroom. For the first time since his stroke, he woke with a sense of anticipation rather than dread. He struggled to push himself upright, his movements still hampered by partial paralysis, but determination fueled his efforts. Well, good morning to you, Mr. William. Marlene's cheerful voice preceded her into the room. She carried a breakfast tray, her eyebrows rising in surprise at finding him already awake and attempting to sit up. My, someone's got a little extra fire today. William's eyes moved immediately to the window. The dog. Marlene smiled, setting down the tray. That magnificent creature is right outside, sir. Hasn't moved from beneath your window all night. She helped adjust his pillows. I brought him some leftover roast beef and fresh water earlier. He ate like he hadn't seen food in weeks. Poor thing. Carter, William asked, dreading the answer. Left for the office already. Said something about not having time for this nonsense, and that animal control would be coming this afternoon. Marlene's lips pressed into a thin line. I may have forgotten to make that call. A ghost of a smile touched William's lips. Thank you. That dog stood up to Mr. Carter like nobody has in years, Marlene said, pouring his morning tea. Reminded me of Miss Elizabeth. God bless her fierce heart. She paused, glancing cautiously at William to see if the mention of his estranged daughter caused pain. William's eyes clouded briefly. She would have liked him. Yes, she would have. Marlene helped William with his first sip of tea. Now, what are we going to call this guardian angel of yours? William considered for a moment. Duke, he said finally, the name coming to him with surprising clarity. His name is Duke. After breakfast, with Marlene's help, William made it to his wheelchair and out to the garden. The German Shepherd was waiting, rising immediately when the wheelchair appeared. The dog approached William with dignity, sitting beside the chair as though he'd been trained for this very purpose. Hello, Duke, William said, reaching out a trembling hand. The dog gently pressed his head against William's palm, amber eyes watching him with an intelligence that seemed almost human. He needs a bath, something terrible, Marlene observed, and probably should see a vet. William nodded. Call Dr. Reynolds. The veterinarian, not my son's G-golf buddy who calls himself my D-doctor. Yes, sir. Marlene smiled, pleased to see the old William emerging from the defeated shell he'd become. And what about Mr. Carter? William stroked Duke's head, feeling the dog's warmth against his leg. My house, he said simply. My dog. Later that morning, Emma Reynolds, DVM, arrived at Magnolia Estate. In her early 50s with salt and pepper hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, she carried herself with the no-nonsense efficiency of someone who'd spent decades handling animals larger and more temperamental than herself. "Well, Mr. Montgomery," she said after examining Duke thoroughly on the garden patio, "apart from being underweight and having some minor skin irritations from living rough, your dog is in remarkably good health. No microchip, though." "He's not technically," Marlene began. "He's mine," William interrupted, his voice stronger than it had been in months. Dr. Reynolds smiled, seeing the connection already formed between the elderly man and the German Shepherd. "He's about 3 years old, I'd say. Purebred and well-trained at some point. Someone invested a lot in this dog before he ended up on his own." "Their loss," Williams said, watching as Duke sat attentively beside his wheelchair, occasionally scanning the property as though on guard duty. "I'll get him vaccinated and start him on heartworm preventative." Dr. Reynolds began preparing an injection. "Fair warning, he's bonded to you already. German Shepherds are intensely loyal. Once they choose their person, that's it." William's weathered hand rested on Duke's newly cleaned fur. "Good." After Dr. Reynolds left, with arrangements made for follow-up care and proper dog supplies to be delivered, William asked Marlene to wheel him to his study. Duke followed, his nails clicking on the polished hardwood floors. The study had once been William's sanctuary, a stately room lined with leather-bound books, dominated by a massive mahogany desk that had belonged to his grandfather. Now, dust gathered on volumes once regularly consulted, and the desk was covered with papers bearing Carter's signature, not his own. "The financial reports," William requested, his voice quiet but determined. "From the last 6 months." Marlene hesitated. "Mr. Carter doesn't usually. I know what my son doesn't want me to see," William said, steel entering his tone. "That's precisely why I need to see it." As Marlene gathered the requested documents, Duke explored the study, sniffing curiously at the baseboards and furniture. He paused at a particular bookshelf, looking back at William as if trying to communicate something. "What is it, boy?" William asked. Duke pawed gently at the lower shelf. Marlene approached, kneeling to see what had caught the dog's attention. "There's nothing here but old photo albums, Mr. William." "Bring them," William requested, a sudden longing in his voice. Marlene pulled out a leather-bound album, dusty from neglect. She placed it on the small table attached to William's wheelchair. As he opened it with trembling fingers, Duke sat beside him, attentive and watchful. The first photograph showed a much younger William standing proudly with his wife, Caroline, a willowy blonde with kind eyes and a gentle smile. Between them stood 2 children, Carter, about 10, serious even then, and Elizabeth, perhaps 7, with her mother's blonde curls and her father's determined jaw. "My family," William whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "When we were still a family." Duke placed his head gently on William's knee, as if sensing his pain. "Miss Elizabeth was just like you, Mr. William," Marlene said softly. "Same spirit, same heart. And I let Carter drive her away," William admitted, the painful truth he'd avoided for 15 years finally spoken aloud. "She tried to warn me about him, and I chose not to see it." The sound of a car crunching on the gravel driveway interrupted the moment. Duke's head lifted, ears alert. "That'll be Mr. Carter," Marlene said, anxiety creeping into her voice. "He usually doesn't come home for lunch. Leave the reports and albums," William instructed. "And Marlene, thank you for everything." As Marlene hurried out, William placed a hand on Duke's head. "Now we see what you're really made of, Duke," he murmured. "And perhaps what I'm made of as well." The study door flew open moments later. Carter stood framed in the doorway, his expression darkening at the sight of the German Shepherd sitting protectively beside his father's wheelchair. "What the hell is that mutt doing in the house?" he demanded, then noticed the financial reports spread across the table. "And what are you doing with those?" William straightened in his wheelchair, Duke a steady presence at his side. "We need to talk, son," he said, his voice clearer and stronger than it had been in months. "About a great many things." "There's nothing to talk about." Carter stalked into the study, his face flushed with anger. He snatched the financial reports from William's table, stuffing them haphazardly into a folder. "You're supposed to be resting, not poking around in business matters you can no longer understand." Duke rose to his feet, a low rumble emanating from his chest. He didn't bare his teeth or make any aggressive move, but his message was clear: back away. Carter glared at the dog. I called animal control. They'll be here within the hour. See, cancel it, Williams said, his momentary clarity now struggling against his condition, but his resolve remained firm. Or I see, call an emergency board meeting. Carter froze, his expression shifting from anger to calculation. You wouldn't. You can't even speak properly. Try me. William held his son's gaze, decades of business negotiations having taught him when to bluff and when to stand firm. This was the latter. I may be physically diminished, but I'm still majority shareholder. For a tense moment, father and son stared at each other across a gulf far wider than the few feet of expensive carpet between them. Duke remained alert, sensing the hostility charging the air. Finally, Carter's shoulders slumped slightly. He pulled out his phone, made a brief call canceling the animal control request, then pocketed it with a scowl. Fine, keep your mutt. But it stays out of my way, and if it makes a mess or bites anyone, it's gone. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. And stay out of company business, Dad. For your own good. The threat lingered in the air after Carter departed. William exhaled slowly, reaching down to stroke Duke's fur. The dog immediately relaxed under his touch, settling back beside the wheelchair, but maintaining his vigilant posture. That was quite a scene. Came a soft voice from the doorway. William looked up to see Marlene standing there, concern evident on her face. She entered, carefully closing the door behind her. I'm worried about you, Mr. William, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Carter, he's changed so much over the years. There's something cold in him now. William nodded, gesturing to the chair across from him. Sit, please, Marlene. We've known each other too long for formalities. Marlene hesitated, then sat, her hands folded in her lap. Duke watched her with intelligent eyes, but made no move, apparently having accepted her as an ally. Do you remember Caroline's garden party, the summer before she left? William asked, his speech clearer when he took his time with the words. Marlene's eyes softened at the memory. Of course, the roses were in full bloom, and Mrs. Montgomery wore that yellow dress that matched the sunflowers. That was the last time I saw her truly happy, William said, his gaze drifting to the photograph album still open on his table. After that day, something changed. She became afraid. Of Mr. Carter, Marlene said quietly, not a question but a statement of fact long understood between them. William nodded slowly. I didn't want to see it then. My son, my heir, the future of Montgomery Textiles. His voice broke slightly. I chose the company over my wife's happiness. Over Elizabeth's warnings. Miss Elizabeth saw it clearly, Marlene agreed. Even at 19, she had your business sense and her mother's intuition. And I called her disloyal when she tried to show me the evidence. William's admission hung heavy in the air. No wonder she left and never looked back. Duke whined softly, pressing his head against William's leg as if sensing his distress. Perhaps, Marlene began hesitantly. Perhaps it's not too late to make amends. William's eyes lifted to meet hers. Do you know where she is? Elizabeth. Marlene's gaze dropped to her hands. I might have kept track of her over the years. Just in case you ever asked. Hope flickered across William's weathered face. Tell me. She's in Asheville, North Carolina. About 4 hours from here. She opened a small bookstore after getting her literature degree. Marlene smiled softly. She's done well for herself, Mr. William. Independent, just like you raised her to be. William absorbed this information, emotions washing across his face. Pride, regret, longing. Does she know about my condition? Marlene shook her head. I don't believe so. After your disagreement, she cut ties completely. Even I haven't spoken to her directly in years, just kept tabs through mutual acquaintances. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed, marking the hour. William glanced at the door, then back to Marlene. We need to be careful. Carter has eyes and ears everywhere. Not everywhere, Marlene said with quiet determination. There are still people loyal to you, Mr. William. People who remember how Montgomery Textiles used to be run, with dignity and respect. William considered this, his businessman's mind, still sharp despite his physical limitations, beginning to form a strategy. There's something happening with the company finances. Carter was too quick to take those reports away. I've heard rumors, Marlene admitted. The mill workers in Greenwood say there's talk of selling to overseas investors. and the old headquarters building downtown is being quietly shown to developers. William's expression darkened. The headquarters my father built? The one I promised would never be sold. Marlene nodded grimly. I believe Mr. Carter is dismantling your legacy piece by piece, sir. Duke suddenly stood alert, his ears perked forward. A moment later, they heard footsteps approaching down the hallway. Marlene quickly gathered the photo albums and returned them to the shelf. The door opened to reveal Frances Cooper, a petite woman in her 70s with silver hair cut in a stylish bob and intelligent eyes behind fashionable glasses. A retired schoolteacher who lived in the historic home neighboring Magnolia Estate. She had been a fixture in Charleston society for decades. I hope I'm not intruding, she said, her voice carrying the refined accent of old Charleston. Marlene mentioned you had a new companion, and I thought I might bring over some homemade treats. She held up a paper bag. Dog biscuits. An old family recipe my retriever always adored. Duke approached Frances cautiously, sniffing the air. After a moment of assessment, his tail wagged slightly, a sign of approval that made William smile. Frances, William greeted her warmly. It's been too long. Please, join us. Frances entered, her sharp eyes taking in the scene. The hastily removed financial reports, the tension still lingering in the air, the protective stance of the German Shepherd. I see things are evolving here at Magnolia Estate, she observed diplomatically, offering a biscuit to Duke, who accepted it with gentle manners. You could say that, William replied, gesturing to another chair. Frances, I may need your help with something delicate. Frances Cooper settled into the offered chair, adjusting her linen jacket. William Montgomery, I've known you since we were both in short pants climbing pecan trees. Whatever you need, you have only to ask. William exchanged a meaningful glance with Marlene, then turned to Frances. What do you know about contacting someone who doesn't want to be found? Frances's eyebrows rose slightly, but her expression remained composed. Is this about Elizabeth? William nodded, emotion tightening his throat. Well, Frances said, reaching down to stroke Duke's head as the dog settled beside her chair, apparently having deemed her trustworthy. As it happens, I taught half the librarians and private investigators in this state. I believe we can arrange something discreet. For the first time in months, perhaps years, William felt something he had nearly forgotten: hope. With Duke warm against his leg and two loyal allies before him, he allowed himself to imagine a future different from the isolated decline Carter had planned for him. Let's begin, he said, his voice stronger than it had been since his stroke. Outside the study window, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, a fitting metaphor for the conflict brewing within the walls of Magnolia Estate. The next morning dawned gray and misty over Charleston, the kind of humid southern day that clung to skin and slowed movements to a languid pace. In the kitchen of Magnolia Estate, Marlene was preparing William's breakfast when she heard the back door open. She turned to find Harold Jenkins, the groundskeeper for over 20 years, standing awkwardly in his muddy work boots. Mornin', Marlene, he said, twisting his worn cap and calloused hands. That new dog still here? Duke? Yes, he's upstairs with Mr. William. Marlene smiled, adding another piece of toast to the breakfast tray. They're inseparable already. Harold glanced over his shoulder before stepping further into the kitchen, lowering his voice. I need to tell you something. Yesterday evening, I was trimming the hedges by Mr. Carter's study. Window was cracked open, and I heard him on the phone. The groundskeeper's weathered face creased with concern. He was talking about Pinewood Care Facility. Said they had a room ready for the old man next week. Said it was all arranged with some doctor. Marlene nearly dropped the teapot. Next week? But he told Mr. William it wouldn't be for months, if at all. There's more, Harold continued, his voice barely above a whisper. After that call, he made another one, to some real estate developer, talking about how Magnolia Estate would be available for repurposing by the end of the month. Called it an outdated money pit. Marlene set the teapot down with a decisive click. That snake. Mr. William built this house with his own hands after the fire took the original mansion. This is his heart, his legacy. What are we going to do? Harold asked, genuine distress on his face. He had watched William Montgomery rebuild this estate from ashes, brick by brick, in the years after the devastating fire that had claimed the original family home. First, we tell Mr. William. Then, Marlene's expression hardened with determination. Then we fight. Upstairs, William sat in his wheelchair by the bedroom window, Duke lying at his feet. The German Shepherd had slept in William's room, alert to every sound throughout the night. Now, in the quiet morning hours, man and dog had fallen into a comfortable routine, as if they'd been companions for years rather than days. A soft knock at the door preceded Marlene's entrance with the breakfast tray. Duke lifted his head, recognized her, and settled back down, though his eyes remained watchful. "Good morning, Mr. William," she greeted, her voice artificially bright. William, who had known her for decades, immediately detected the strain beneath her cheerfulness. "What's wrong?" he asked directly, his speech clearer in the morning hours before fatigue set in. Marlene set down the tray and took a deep breath. Harold overheard some troubling conversations yesterday. She relayed what the groundskeeper had told her, watching as William's expression shifted from concern to deep hurt and finally to anger. "So," William said after absorbing the information, "my son plans to commit me to Pinewood and sell my home within the month." His hand found Duke's head, drawing strength from the dog's solid presence. "Faster than I anticipated. We need to act quickly," Marlene urged. "Miss Francis is making inquiries about Elizabeth, but that could take time we don't have." William nodded thoughtfully, feeding a small piece of bacon to Duke. "We need leverage. And evidence." "Evidence of what exactly, sir?" "Of whatever Carter is trying to hide." William's business acumen, honed over decades of corporate maneuvering, was coming back to life. "He's been too desperate to keep me away from the company records. There's something there he doesn't want me to see." A knock at the bedroom door interrupted their conversation. Duke immediately stood at attention, positioning himself between the door and William. Marlene opened it to find one of the younger housekeepers, Jenny, looking nervous. "Sorry to interrupt, but Dr. Winters is here for Mr. Montgomery's checkup," she announced. "Mr. Carter scheduled it. The doctor's waiting in the downstairs parlor." William and Marlene exchanged a meaningful glance. Dr. Gregory Winters was Carter's hand-picked physician, a man more concerned with pleasing the younger Montgomery than with his patient's actual health. "Tell him I'll be down shortly," William instructed. After Jenny left, he turned to Marlene. "This may be the beginning of Carter's plan. Winters will likely recommend immediate placement in a care facility." "What should we do?" Marlene asked. William's eyes narrowed with determination. "Call Dr. Matthews." Dr. James Matthews had been William's personal physician for over 30 years before Carter had effectively pushed him aside in favor of Winters. Unlike the younger doctor, Matthews was independent, well-respected in the medical community, and, most importantly, not in Carter's pocket. "Right away," Marlene agreed, hurrying to make the call. 20 minutes later, William entered the parlor with Marlene pushing his wheelchair and Duke walking beside them. Dr. Winters, a tall, thin man with an artificial smile and cold eyes, rose from his seat, his expression faltering at the sight of the German Shepherd. "Mr. Montgomery," he greeted with practiced warmth. "I wasn't aware you had acquired a pet." "Duke stays with me," William stated firmly, gesturing for Marlene to position his wheelchair opposite the doctor. Dr. Winters eyed the dog with distaste, but didn't argue. "Very well. I understand you've been experiencing some new symptoms?" Mr. Carter mentioned increased confusion and agitation. William's eyebrows rose. "Did he? Interesting, considering I haven't seen my son since yesterday afternoon." The doctor shifted uncomfortably. "Well, he's naturally concerned about your welfare. In fact, we've been discussing whether a more structured care environment might be beneficial for your recovery." "By structured care environment, I assume you mean Pinewood," William said bluntly. "Well, yes." Winters opened his medical bag, avoiding eye contact. "It's a very reputable facility with specialized stroke rehabilitation programs." "Is it?" William challenged. "Because according to the State Medical Board's latest review, which I read last month, Pinewood has been cited 3 times for understaffing and negligent care in the past year alone." Dr. Winters looked up sharply, clearly not expecting his patient to be so well-informed. Before he could respond, the parlor door opened again, and Dr. James Matthews entered, a robust man in his 60s with silver hair and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. "William, my old friend," Dr. Matthews greeted warmly, approaching the wheelchair. Marlene called. "Said you wanted a second opinion." He noticed Duke and smiled, offering his hand for the dog to sniff. "And who's this handsome fellow?" "James," William acknowledged with visible relief. Thank you for coming on such short notice. This is Duke, my new companion. Duke, this is Dr. Matthews. A friend. Duke sniffed the doctor's hand, then allowed a brief pat before returning to his position beside William's chair. Dr. Winters stood abruptly. This is highly irregular. Mr. Carter specifically requested, my son does not make my medical decisions. William interrupted, his voice stronger than it had been in months. I am still competent to choose my own physician, as you well know, Dr. Winters. Or would you like to testify otherwise under oath? The implied threat hung in the air. If Winters formally declared William incompetent without proper evaluation and evidence, he could face serious professional consequences. I'll inform Mr. Carter of this development, Winters said stiffly, gathering his things. Good day, Mr. Montgomery. After Winters departed, Dr. Matthews sat down across from William, his expression serious. Now, what's really going on here, William? Marlene sounded quite urgent on the phone. William glanced at Marlene, who nodded encouragingly. I need your help, James. My son is attempting to have me committed to Pinewood against my will so he can sell Magnolia Estate. Dr. Matthews frowned deeply. That's a serious accusation. And unfortunately true, William replied. I need you to conduct a thorough examination and officially document my mental competence. I may have physical limitations from the stroke, but my mind is clear. Of course, Dr. Matthews agreed. But William, if Carter is truly planning this, a medical evaluation alone may not be enough to stop him. He has your power of attorney for healthcare decisions. A power I intend to revoke, William said firmly. And I'll need your testimony to support that action. As Dr. Matthews began his examination, the front door of Magnolia Estate opened with a bang. Heavy footsteps pounded down the hallway before Carter burst into the parlor, his face contorted with fury. What the hell is going on here? He demanded, glaring at Dr. Matthews. Winters just called me. You have no authority to examine my father. Duke immediately stood, placing himself between Carter and William, his stance protective but not aggressive. Dr. Matthews rose calmly, unfazed by the younger man's outburst. Actually, Carter, as a licensed physician with a prior doctor-patient relationship with your father, I have every right to examine him at his request. The question is, why are you so opposed to it? Carter's gaze darted between Dr. Matthews, William, and Marlene, anger mixing with calculation in his eyes. This is ridiculous. My father is clearly being manipulated by the staff. He pointed accusingly at Marlene. And that dangerous animal should be removed immediately. The only danger in this room, William said quietly, is the threat you pose to my autonomy, son. Carter's face flushed darker. You have no idea what you're saying. This proves my point about your mental state. Actually, Dr. Matthews interjected, in my professional assessment, your father is entirely lucid and competent to make his own decisions. His speech difficulties from the stroke do not impact his cognitive function. This is absurd, Carter sputtered. You haven't seen him day to day. The confusion, the memory lapses, which mysteriously occur only when you're present, Marlene noted pointedly. Carter turned on her. You're fired. Pack your things and be out by dinner. No. William's voice cut through the tension like a blade. Marlene stays. This is still my house, Carter. My estate. My company. For a moment, father and son locked eyes in a silent battle of wills. Duke remained steadfast beside William, his amber eyes fixed on Carter. Finally, Carter's shoulders stiffened. We'll see about that, he said coldly before turning on his heel and stalking out. After he left, William exhaled slowly, reaching down to stroke Duke's fur. Thank you for coming, James. I think we have very little time now. Dr. Matthews nodded gravely. I'll prepare my formal assessment immediately. And William, he placed a hand on his old friend's shoulder. Whatever you need, I'm here. Carter has gone too far. As Marlene showed Dr. Matthews out, William remained in the parlor with Duke, gazing out at the gardens where generations of Montgomerys had walked. The estate had weathered hurricanes, economic downturns, and family tragedies, but never before had it faced a threat from within its own walls. We stand our ground, Duke, he murmured to the German shepherd. This house was built by Montgomerys, and it will remain with Montgomerys. Duke pressed his head against William's knee, his steady presence a silent promise. You are not alone in this fight. Elizabeth Montgomery hadn't set foot in Charleston for 15 years. As she drove her modest Subaru through the historic district, past the familiar wrought iron gates and antebellum mansions, memories washed over her like the incoming tide, some sweet, many painful. At 34, she'd built a life far removed from the Montgomery legacy. Her small bookstore in Asheville, aptly named New Chapter, had become a beloved community hub, and her cozy craftsman bungalow offered the simple peace she'd never found in her father's mansion. She pulled over near Colonial Lake, needing a moment to collect herself before continuing to her destination. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled out her phone, rereading the message that had upended her carefully constructed life 3 days ago. "Your father needs you. His situation is dire. Please come." Frances Cooper, a simple text from her former teacher, a woman she'd always respected. No dramatic details, no emotional manipulation, just a straightforward plea that Elizabeth hadn't been able to ignore. "What am I doing?" she whispered to her reflection in the rearview mirror. Her mother's blue eyes stared back at her, framed by honey blonde hair cut in a practical bob, a deliberate departure from the elaborate styles expected of Montgomery women. The small silver hoop in her nose and the colorful tattoo of a phoenix peeking from beneath her sleeve were further declarations of independence. After taking a deep breath, Elizabeth pulled back onto the street, navigating the familiar route to Frances Cooper's historic Victorian home a few blocks from Magnolia Estate. She'd deliberately arranged to meet there rather than at her childhood home. She wasn't ready to face those ghosts yet. Frances was waiting on her porch, silver hair gleaming in the afternoon sun, her posture as straight as when she'd taught Charleston's elite children for 40 years. The moment Elizabeth stepped from her car, Frances descended the stairs with surprising agility for a woman in her 70s and enveloped her in a warm embrace. "Elizabeth Montgomery," she said, pulling back to examine her former student. "You look wonderful, my dear. Asheville clearly agrees with you." "It's good to see you, Miss Frances," Elizabeth replied, the familiar Southern honorific slipping out automatically. "Though I wish it were under different circumstances." Frances nodded solemnly. "Come inside. We have much to discuss and little time." The interior of Frances' home was exactly as Elizabeth remembered, elegant without ostentation, walls lined with bookshelves, and comfortable furniture that invited conversation. The scent of freshly brewed sweet tea and lemon cookies filled the air. "Now," Frances said once they were settled in her sunlit parlor, "I imagine you have questions." Elizabeth set down her untouched tea. "What's happened to my father? All you said was that his situation is dire." Frances sighed. "Your father suffered a severe stroke 6 months ago. It affected his mobility and speech, but not his mind. Carter has been systematically isolating him, limiting his access to company affairs, and now plans to commit him to Pinewood against his will." Elizabeth's face paled. "Pinewood? That place is practically a warehouse for unwanted elderly relatives." "Precisely. And once your father is there, Carter intends to sell Magnolia Estate to developers who plan to raise it and build luxury condominiums." "He can't do that," Elizabeth exclaimed, then caught herself. "Actually, he probably can. Dad gave him power of attorney years ago, didn't he?" Frances nodded grimly. "For both business and healthcare decisions. Your father is trying to revoke those powers, but Carter is moving quickly." Elizabeth ran a hand through her hair, a gesture reminiscent of her father when strategizing. "Why now? After 15 years of silence. Why does Dad suddenly want me involved?" Frances leaned forward. "2 reasons. First, he finally sees Carter clearly, as you did years ago. And second," she smiled slightly, "Duke." "Duke? Who's Duke?" "Not who what. Duke is a German shepherd who appeared at Magnolia Estate a week ago and appointed himself your father's protector. That dog has done more to revive William's spirit than anything else since his stroke." Elizabeth raised an eyebrow skeptically. "You're telling me a stray dog has changed my father's perspective on everything?" "Sometimes," Frances said softly. "It takes an outsider to show us what we've been blind to in our own families." Duke stood up to Carter in a way no human had dared to in years. It was the catalyst your father needed. Elizabeth fell silent, processing this information. The father she remembered had been stubborn, traditional, and utterly devoted to the Montgomery legacy, which he'd always viewed Carter as embodying, despite Elizabeth's warnings about her brother's true nature. There's something else you should know, Francis continued carefully. Your father has been asking about your mother. Elizabeth's head snapped up. Mom? But she's been gone for 20 years, yes. But William has been reviewing old documents, asking questions about the circumstances of her departure. He knows why she left, Elizabeth said bitterly. Carter's behavior drove her away, and Dad chose his precious son and heir over his wife. End of story. Francis shook her head slowly. I'm not so sure that's the complete truth, Elizabeth. There have been discoveries. Before she could elaborate, a knock at the door interrupted them. Francis excused herself and returned moments later with Marlene, whose face lit up at the sight of Elizabeth. Miss Elizabeth. Marlene rushed forward, embracing her tightly. Oh, child, it's been too long. Elizabeth found herself blinking back unexpected tears. Marlene, you haven't changed a bit. And you've grown even more beautiful, Marlene replied, holding Elizabeth at arm's length to study her. You look just like your mother. The mention of Caroline Montgomery sobered the reunion. Elizabeth gestured for Marlene to sit. Francis was just telling me about my father's condition. How bad is it really? Marlene's expression grew serious. Physically, he's improving slightly. His right side was most affected, but with therapy, he's regaining some function. His speech is clearest in the mornings, but becomes more difficult as he tires. She leaned forward. But his mind, Miss Elizabeth, it's as sharp as ever. And he's fighting back now. Because of this dog? Duke. Marlene smiled. You need to see them together to understand. That animal sensed something in your father that needed protecting. He stands guard every moment, especially when Carter is near. Carter. Elizabeth's voice hardened. Francis says he's planning to institutionalize Dad and sell Magnolia Estate. Marlene nodded grimly. And soon. We've been gathering evidence of his intentions, but time is running out. Dr. Matthews, you remember your father's old physician? He's documented your father's mental competence, but Carter has significant legal advantages. Elizabeth rose and paced the room, her mind racing. The business degree she'd earned before pursuing her passion for literature was coming in handy as she analyzed the situation. What about the board? Montgomery Textiles is still a family company with a board of directors, isn't it? Carter can't make major decisions unilaterally. The board has been effectively neutralized, Francis explained. Over the years, Carter has replaced most members with his allies. The few remaining independent directors have limited information. Elizabeth stopped by the window, gazing in the direction of Magnolia Estate, just visible through the trees. I need to see my father. That's why I'm here, Marlene said. Mr. William asked specifically, but we need to be careful. Carter left for Atlanta this morning. Something about finalizing arrangements with investors. He'll be gone until tomorrow afternoon. So we have a window, Elizabeth concluded, making her decision. Let's go now. 20 minutes later, Marlene drove them through the service entrance of Magnolia Estate, taking the winding back road that led to the kitchen gardens. Elizabeth felt her heart pounding as the familiar facade of her childhood home came into view. The white columns, the wraparound veranda, the magnolia trees that had given the estate its name. Nothing's changed, she murmured. And everything has, Marlene replied softly. They entered through the kitchen, where Harold the groundskeeper and Jenny the young housekeeper were having coffee. Both stood immediately upon seeing Elizabeth, their faces registering shock and then hope. Miss Elizabeth, Harold exclaimed. Thank the Lord you've come. Jenny, who had joined the staff after Elizabeth's departure, simply stared in awe. You look just like your portrait in the East Hall, she blurted out. Elizabeth managed a smile. Where's my father? In the sunroom with Duke, Marlene answered, leading the way. As they approached the sunroom, Elizabeth slowed her steps, suddenly hesitant. 15 years of hurt, anger, and estrangement condensed into a knot in her throat. What would she say to the man who had chosen his son's lies over his daughter's truth? Who had allowed her mother to leave rather than confront Carter's growing cruelty? Marlene sensed her hesitation and touched her arm gently. He's still your father, Miss Elizabeth. And he needs you now more than he ever has. Taking a deep breath, Elizabeth nodded and followed Marlene into the sunroom. A beautiful glass-enclosed space overlooking the gardens, filled with potted palms and comfortable wicker furniture. Sitting in a wheelchair by the windows was William Montgomery, thinner and frielier than she remembered, silver hair neatly combed, his right hand resting on the head of the largest German shepherd she had ever seen. At their entrance, Duke immediately stood at attention, positioning himself protectively beside William's chair. The dog's amber eyes assessed Elizabeth intensely, as if measuring her intentions. William looked up, his eyes, still the same piercing blue she remembered, widening in disbelief and then filling with tears. "Elizabeth," he said, her name emerging clearly despite his condition. "You came." The simple statement, laden with emotion, broke something inside her. Elizabeth crossed the room and knelt beside her father's wheelchair, taking his left hand, the one less affected by the stroke, in both of hers. "Hello, Dad," she said softly. William's fingers tightened around hers with surprising strength. With his other hand, he gestured to the dog. "This is Duke." Elizabeth looked at the German shepherd, who continued to study her with intelligent eyes. "So you're the one who's been looking after my father," she said. As if understanding her words, Duke relaxed his stance slightly and took a step forward, allowing Elizabeth to offer her hand. He sniffed it carefully, then, in what Marlene would later describe as a moment of canine judgment, gently licked her fingers. William smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. "He approves," he said, each word carefully formed. "Smart dog." Elizabeth found herself smiling back, the years of estrangement momentarily bridged by this simple exchange. Duke settled back beside William's chair but kept his attention on Elizabeth, apparently having accepted her into his small circle of trusted humans. "Francis and Marlene told me what's been happening," Elizabeth said, moving to sit in the chair opposite her father. "About Carter's plans for you and for Magnolia Estate." William nodded gravely. "He thinks. I don't know, but I do." He gestured to a folder on the table beside him. "Evidence. Been collecting." Elizabeth picked up the folder and began examining its contents. Copies of emails, financial statements, and legal documents, all pointing to Carter's systematic dismantling of the Montgomery legacy. Her expression hardened as she read. "He's selling off company assets, moving manufacturing overseas while telling the board it's just modernization," she said, her business training allowing her to quickly grasp the implications. "And he set up shell companies to hide the proceeds." She looked up at her father. "This is embezzlement on a massive scale." William nodded, frustration evident in his expression as he struggled to articulate his thoughts. "Need more proof." "His office. Safe." Elizabeth understood immediately. "There's more evidence in Carter's office safe? Do you know the combination?" William smiled slightly. "Elizabeth. Caroline, 1989. My birth date," Elizabeth realized. That arrogant bastard. He never thought anyone would challenge him, so he used an obvious combination. She closed the folder decisively. "I'll get the evidence, but we need a plan for what comes next. Carter has legal authority over your affairs right now." "Dr. Matthews," William said. "Coming tomorrow." "New documents." Marlene, who had been standing quietly by the door, explained, "Dr. Matthews is bringing paperwork to revoke Carter's power of attorney and appoint Elizabeth instead, if she's willing. He's also documented your father's mental competence." Elizabeth met her father's questioning gaze. 15 years of hurt and absence stretched between them, but in his eyes, she saw regret, love, and a plea for a second chance. "I'm willing," she said firmly. "But Dad, there's something else we need to discuss." She took a deep breath. "I need to know the truth about Mom, about why she really left." William's face clouded with pain. He glanced at Duke, then back to his daughter. "I've been remembering. Finding things." He gestured weakly toward his bedroom. "Letters. Hidden." Elizabeth looked to Marlene for clarification. "Duke found them," Marlene explained, still sounding somewhat amazed. 3 days ago, he started pawing at a loose floorboard in your father's closet. Underneath were letters your mother wrote but never sent, along with some financial documents she'd apparently hidden. Elizabeth's heart raced. "What do they say?" William's eyes filled with tears. "She was afraid of Carter. Discovered something terrible. I didn't believe her." His voice broke on the admission. "My greatest shame." Before Elizabeth could respond, Duke suddenly stood alert, ears forward. A moment later, they heard the distant sound of a car on the main driveway, the distinctive purr of Carter's Jaguar. "He's back early," Marlene said, alarm evident in her voice. Elizabeth made a split-second decision. "Marlene, take Dad and Duke to Francis's house. Now, through the back way. I'll deal with Carter." "Elizabeth, no," William protested. He's dangerous. Elizabeth straightened, a determined glint in her eyes reminiscent of her father in his prime. So am I, Dad. So am I. As Marlene hurriedly prepared to move William, Elizabeth squared her shoulders and headed toward the main entrance, ready to confront the brother who had destroyed her family and determined to prevent him from causing any more harm. The grandfather clock in the foyer chimed 3 times as Elizabeth positioned herself at the bottom of the grand staircase. The sound echoed through the mansion, a familiar melody from her childhood that now seemed to count down to an inevitable collision. She smoothed her hands over her simple linen dress, suddenly conscious of how different she looked from the Southern belle her brother would remember. Good. She wasn't that girl anymore. The front door swung open, and Carter Montgomery strode in, immaculate in a tailored charcoal suit, talking rapidly into his Bluetooth earpiece. I don't care what the environmental assessment says. We've already greased the right palms at the county office. He laughed sharply. Trust me, by this time next month, Magnolia Estate will be nothing but a memory and a pile of. He froze mid-sentence as he finally registered Elizabeth's presence. For a brief moment, naked shock crossed his features before he recovered, his face settling into a practiced smile that never reached his eyes. I'll call you back, he said into his earpiece, disconnecting without waiting for a response. Well, the prodigal daughter returns. His voice dripped with false warmth. This is unexpected. Hello, Carter. Elizabeth remained perfectly still, studying the brother she hadn't seen in 15 years. At 42, he was still handsome in that polished, corporate way, but the years had hardened something in his face, deepening the lines of calculation around his mouth and eyes. Carter set his briefcase down and approached her, arms outstretched as if for an embrace. Elizabeth, what a wonderful surprise. If I'd known you were coming, I would have. Save it. Elizabeth interrupted, stepping back to avoid his touch. I heard what you were saying when you walked in. Planning to demolish our family home, Carter? That's low, even for you. Carter's smile tightened. His eyes darted around the foyer. Where's Dad? And that mongrel he's so attached to? Safe from you. Elizabeth replied evenly. Which is where they'll stay until we sort this out. The pretense of warmth vanished from Carter's expression. There's nothing to sort out. Our father is unwell, physically and mentally. I have legal authority over his affairs and his healthcare decisions. If you've helped him leave this house against medical advice, you're interfering with his proper care. Elizabeth laughed, a sharp, disbelieving sound. His proper care? You mean shipping him off to Pinewood while you sell his home out from under him? While you dismantle the company he built? I see Dad's been filling your head with paranoid fantasies. Carter moved toward the study, clearly intending to continue the conversation away from the ears of any staff who might be listening. The stroke affected his cognitive function. Dr. Winters has documented his confusion and delusions. Elizabeth followed him into the wood-paneled study, her father's domain for decades, now colonized by Carter's sleeker, more modern tastes. Where once there had been warm leather and family photographs, now there were chrome accents and abstract art that matched nothing else in the historic home. Dr. Matthews, Dad's real doctor, not your puppet, has thoroughly evaluated him and found him perfectly competent, Elizabeth countered, closing the door behind them. His physical limitations don't affect his mind, and you know it. Carter poured himself a generous measure of scotch from the crystal decanter on the sideboard. He didn't offer one to Elizabeth. Dr. Matthews is a sentimental old fool who's been friends with Dad for too long to be objective. Winters is a top neurologist. Winters is a hack who'll write whatever assessment you pay him for. Elizabeth moved to stand behind their father's desk, a power position she knew would irritate her brother. I've seen the documentation, Carter. All of it. The plans for Magnolia Estate, the offshore accounts, the systematic looting of Montgomery textiles. Carter's knuckles whitened around his glass, but his voice remained controlled. You've been gone for 15 years, Lizzie. You walked away from this family, from the company, from your responsibilities. You don't get to waltz back in and make accusations about things you don't understand. I understand perfectly. Elizabeth leaned forward, placing her palms flat on the desk. I understand that you've been planning this for years. I understand that you drove Mom away because she discovered what you were doing. And I understand that you manipulated Dad into choosing you over both of us. Something dangerous flashed in Carter's eyes. He set his glass down with deliberate care. Where exactly is our father right now, Elizabeth? Somewhere you can't get to him. Carter laughed softly. This is ridiculous. I'm his legal guardian and healthcare proxy. If you've removed him from his home without proper medical supervision, that's elder abuse. One call to the police and, go ahead, Elizabeth challenged. Call them. I'm sure they'd be very interested in these. She pulled a USB drive from her pocket and held it up. Full documentation of your embezzlement from Montgomery Textiles. Copies of the plans to sell Magnolia Estate while Dad is conveniently locked away. Oh, and the emails between you and Dr. Winters discussing how to fabricate a diagnosis of dementia. She was bluffing about the last part, but from the flicker of uncertainty on Carter's face, she knew she'd hit close to the mark. You're bluffing, he said, but doubt had crept into his voice. Want to risk it? Elizabeth pocketed the drive again. The board meeting is in 3 days, Carter. I wonder how they'd react to this information. Carter's expression darkened. He moved around the desk with surprising speed, grabbing Elizabeth's wrist. Give me that drive. Elizabeth didn't flinch. Remove your hand, or I swear to God, I will break your fingers one by one. The calm certainty in her voice made Carter hesitate. Those self-defense classes you mocked when we were teenagers? I kept taking them. Advanced training. I can drop a man twice my size, and you've always been soft, Carter. After a tense moment, Carter released her, stepping back with a forced laugh. Always so dramatic, Lizzie. Look, I don't know what tall tales Dad has been spinning, but the truth is simple. He's unwell, the company is struggling in an outdated facility, and Magnolia Estate costs a fortune to maintain. I'm making sensible business decisions. By hiding assets in shell companies? By secretly selling off equipment and property without board approval? Those aren't business decisions, Carter. They're crimes. Carter studied her, reassessing. The contemptuous brother was replaced by the calculating businessman. What do you want, Elizabeth? Money? A position at the company? Name your price to walk away again. The question hit Elizabeth like a slap. After everything, he still thought she could be bought. That everything had a price. That loyalty and family were just commodities to be traded. I want Dad safe. I want his home protected. I want the company he built to remain intact, she said quietly. And I want the truth about Mom. Something shifted in Carter's expression at the mention of their mother. A flash of, was it fear? Guilt? It was gone too quickly to identify. Mom left because she was unhappy. She'd been unhappy for years. You know that. His tone was dismissive, but he wouldn't meet her eyes. That's not the whole story. Elizabeth watched him carefully. We found her letters, Carter. The ones she hid before she left. Carter went very still. What letters? The ones where she wrote about discovering what you were doing. About how Dad wouldn't believe her when she tried to warn him. Elizabeth took a calculated risk, pushing forward despite not having read the letters herself yet. About how frightened she was of what you might do if she exposed you. Carter's facade cracked momentarily, revealing something ugly beneath. Then he collected himself, his expression smoothing into practiced concern. This proves my point about Dad's mental state. There are no such letters. Mom left because she was having an affair with her tennis instructor. Dad covered it up to avoid scandal, but that's the truth. The lie was delivered with such conviction that Elizabeth almost doubted herself. Almost. But she'd seen her father's face when he spoke of the letters, the raw guilt and grief in his eyes. We'll see what the police make of all this, Elizabeth said, turning toward the door. I'm taking everything to them tomorrow. Wait. Carter's voice stopped her. Let's not be hasty. Perhaps we can come to an arrangement that benefits everyone. Elizabeth turned back. I'm listening. A compromise, Carter offered, moving back behind the desk, reclaiming the position of authority. Dad stays at Magnolia Estate with proper in-home care. I maintain control of the company, but with greater transparency to the board, and we keep the authorities out of our family business. He spread his hands in a gesture of reasonableness. Family legacy preserved, Dad comfortable, no public scandal. Elizabeth studied her brother, seeing the calculation behind his seeming capitulation. And the evidence of financial impropriety? Past mistakes, easily corrected. I'll ensure all funds are properly accounted for going forward. For a moment, Elizabeth considered it. The easiest path, certainly. No messy public exposure, no legal battles. But then she remembered her father's frail form in the wheelchair, the fear in his eyes when speaking of Carter. She remembered Duke, standing guard against a threat he could sense, but not understand. No deal, she said firmly. Here's what's going to happen. Tomorrow, Dad is revoking your power of attorney. I'll be appointed in your place. The board will receive a full accounting of your actions, and they can decide your fate with the company. Magnolia Estate remains in the family, untouched. Carter's false affability vanished. You think it's that simple? I've spent years building relationships with the board, with local officials. One word from me about Dad's deteriorating mental state, and your new power of attorney means nothing. One call about a daughter with a history of family estrangement suddenly taking an elderly parent from his home, and you'll be investigated for elder abuse. His voice lowered. You can't win this, Elizabeth. Maybe not alone, Elizabeth acknowledged. But I'm not alone, am I? There's Dad, Marlene, Dr. Matthews, Francis Cooper, respected members of this community who have witnessed your actions. And there are these. She pulled a small digital recorder from her pocket. Thanks for being so forthcoming about your plans just now. And yesterday, with your investors. Carter's eyes widened. You've been recording conversations in my house. That's illegal. South Carolina is a one-party consent state for recordings, Carter. You should know that, being such a savvy businessman. Elizabeth slipped the recorder back into her pocket. Besides, this isn't your house. It's Dad's. And he consented to the recordings. Fury twisted Carter's features, momentarily revealing the true face behind the polished mask. He took a step toward her. You little. The study door burst open, revealing Harold the groundskeeper, still in his work clothes, but standing with unexpected authority. Everything all right in here, Miss Elizabeth? Thought I heard raised voices. Elizabeth nodded calmly. Everything's fine, Harold. My brother and I were just concluding our discussion. She moved toward the door. I'll be leaving now, Carter. I suggest you use the evening to consider your position very carefully. Carter's voice stopped her at the threshold. This isn't over, Elizabeth. Not by a long shot. She turned back to him, meeting his gaze steadily. No, it's not. But it will be soon. With that, she left, Harold following protectively behind her. Outside, Elizabeth managed to maintain her composure until she reached her car, parked discreetly down the service road. Only then did she allow her hands to shake, the full weight of the confrontation hitting her. Carter was dangerous, more dangerous than she'd anticipated. There was something in his eyes when she'd mentioned their mother's letters. Not just anger or fear, but something colder, more calculated. She started the car, pulling away from Magnolia Estate with a sense of foreboding. The recorder in her pocket contained damning evidence, certainly, but not nearly as much as she'd implied. The USB drive was practically empty, a prop for her bluff. And she still hadn't read her mother's letters or seen the additional evidence her father mentioned. As Elizabeth drove toward Francis Cooper's home, where her father and Duke waited, she knew with certainty that the real battle was just beginning. Carter wouldn't surrender the fortune and power he'd spent years accumulating without a fight. And something told her he'd be willing to go to lengths she'd only begun to imagine to protect himself. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the road, turning the Spanish moss hanging from the ancient oaks into spectral curtains. Somewhere in those shadows, Elizabeth sensed, lay answers to questions she'd been asking for 15 years, about her mother, about her brother, about the true legacy of the Montgomery name. And somewhere in those same shadows lurked dangers she was only beginning to comprehend. The Cooper household hummed with quiet tension as dusk settled over Charleston. In Francis's elegant sitting room, William Montgomery sat in his wheelchair by the window, Duke vigilant at his side. Marlene bustled around with nervous energy, arranging and rearranging teacups. Dr. Matthews had arrived shortly after Elizabeth's departure for Magnolia Estate, and now sat reviewing legal documents at a small writing desk. When the front door finally opened, all heads turned. Duke stood at attention, relaxing only when Elizabeth stepped into the room. What happened? William asked immediately, his speech careful but clear. Elizabeth exhaled slowly, sinking into the nearest chair. Carter was, predictably Carter, threatening, manipulative, and dangerous. She recounted the confrontation, watching her father's expression darken with each detail. Did he believe your bluff about the evidence? Francis asked, her teacher's perceptiveness catching what Elizabeth hadn't explicitly stated. I'm not sure, Elizabeth admitted. He was rattled, especially when I mentioned Mom's letters. She turned to her father. Which I need to see. Now. William nodded, gesturing to Marlene. From a worn leather satchel, Marlene withdrew a bundle of envelopes tied with faded blue ribbon. She handed them reverently to Elizabeth. "Your mother wrote these in the months before she left," Marlene explained softly. "Duke found them beneath a loose floorboard in your father's closet 3 days ago." Elizabeth's hands trembled slightly as she untied the ribbon. The paper was yellowed with age, but her mother's elegant handwriting remained crisp, a painful reminder of the woman who had vanished from her life when she was just 19. The first letter was dated January 15th, 2005, nearly 6 months before Caroline Montgomery's disappearance. "My dearest William, I write this knowing you may never read it. Perhaps that gives me the courage to be more honest than I've been able to be face to face. There is something wrong in our family, something I've tried to ignore for years for the sake of peace, for the sake of the Montgomery name that means so much to you. It's about Carter. I've watched him change from a sensitive boy into someone I no longer recognize, someone cold, calculating, and frightening in his ambition. Last week, I overheard him on the phone discussing ways to manipulate the acquisition of the Wilson property, talking about leveraging Mr. Wilson's heart condition to pressure him into selling below market value. This isn't business acumen, William. It's cruelty. When I confronted him, he laughed and told me I wouldn't understand how the real world works. But I understand more than he realizes. I understand that the son we raised is becoming something neither of us intended. I fear you won't believe me. You see only his success, his charm, his dedication to the company. You don't see what I see when he thinks no one is watching." With love and trepidation, Caroline Elizabeth looked up, her throat tight. "She tried to warn you." William nodded, pain etching deeper lines in his weathered face. "I dismissed her concerns. Thought she was being dramatic, overprotective." Elizabeth opened the next letter, dated March 3rd, 2005. "William, something is happening with the company finances. I found discrepancies in the reports Carter left in his study. Significant sums being diverted to accounts I don't recognize. When I asked our accountant about them, he became nervous, saying Carter had instructed him that these were special project allocations, not to be discussed. I fear our son is embezzling from Montgomery Textiles. I have no proof beyond these numbers that don't add up, and my own instincts screaming that something is very wrong. Elizabeth sees it too. She's tried to tell you, but you brush her concerns aside as sibling rivalry. Please, William, listen to your daughter. She has your business sense and my intuition. I'm afraid of what will happen if Carter discovers I'm investigating. He's changed so much. Sometimes when he looks at me, I feel a chill I can't explain. Still yours, Caroline. The third letter, dated May 20th, 2005, just 2 weeks before Caroline's disappearance, was written in a more hurried hand. William, I've found proof. The documents are in a safety deposit box at First Charleston Bank, box number 247. I've left the key taped inside my copy of Pride and Prejudice in our bedroom. Carter has been systematically siphoning funds from the company for years, establishing offshore accounts and shell corporations. Worse, I believe he may have bribed city officials regarding the zoning for the new factory. The environmental study was falsified. I confronted him today. It was a mistake. He didn't threaten me explicitly, but the implication was clear. He said, "Mother, you need to consider your health. Stress can be so dangerous at your age." I'm only 52, William. I'm taking these letters and the key to the safety deposit box and hiding them. If you're reading this, then I've either found the courage to show you everything, or something has happened to me. I love you. I've always loved you. But I cannot stay in this house with him any longer. Caroline Elizabeth's hands shook as she looked up from the final letter. Mom didn't just leave. She was afraid for her life. Her voice cracked with the realization. And I've spent 15 years believing she abandoned us. William's eyes filled with tears. I found the key, where she said. Duke led me to the book yesterday. Haven't been able to get to the bank. The safety deposit box, Elizabeth breathed. It still exists. Dr. Matthews nodded. I called the bank this morning. The account is active. Fees paid automatically from Caroline's personal account all these years. We need to get those documents, Elizabeth said, standing decisively. First thing tomorrow. There's more, Marlene said quietly. She hesitated, glancing at William, who nodded for her to continue. After Miss Caroline disappeared, there was a fire at the downtown office. All the accounting records from the previous 5 years were destroyed. The police ruled it accidental, faulty wiring. Too convenient, Elizabeth murmured. With the records gone, no one could verify Mom's claims. A horrible thought struck her. Do you think Carter? Do you think he might have? No, William interrupted firmly. Caroline left. There was evidence. A note. Withdrawal from her personal account. Ticket purchased in her name. All of which could have been fabricated, Francis pointed out gently. I'm not suggesting anything, William, but we must consider all possibilities. A heavy silence fell over the room, broken only by Duke's soft whine as he pressed closer to William's side, sensing his distress. Tomorrow, Elizabeth said finally, we go to the bank. Then we take everything, Mom's letters, the safety deposit box contents, and all the evidence we've gathered about Carter's current schemes, to the police. William nodded in agreement, but Francis looked troubled. Carter won't go quietly, the former teacher warned. He has influence with local officials, and he'll fight any accusations with everything he has. We need to be prepared for backlash. She's right, Dr. Matthews added. And there's the immediate concern of William's legal protection. We should file the paperwork to revoke Carter's power of attorney first thing tomorrow. I have a colleague who's a judge. We might be able to get an emergency hearing given the circumstances. As they discussed strategy, Duke suddenly lifted his head, ears alert. A moment later, the doorbell rang. Everyone tensed. Francis moved to the window, peering cautiously through the curtains. It's Detective Rivera, she announced with surprise. The police? Elizabeth asked. Did someone call them? Not us, Marlene replied, exchanging concerned glances with William. Francis went to answer the door, returning moments later with a tall woman in plain clothes, her detective's badge clipped to her belt. Detective Maria Rivera had the composed demeanor of someone who had seen it all and was rarely surprised anymore. Mr. Montgomery, she greeted William with a respectful nod. Ms. Montgomery, she added, turning to Elizabeth. I apologize for the intrusion, but I received a concerning call from your son, sir. He claims you've been removed from your home against your will by your estranged daughter. Elizabeth tensed, but William spoke before she could respond. Detective, he said, his speech measured and deliberate. My daughter is here at my request. I left my home, voluntarily. Rivera studied him carefully, clearly assessing his mental state. Mr. Montgomery, your son has expressed concerns about your cognitive function following your stroke. He's shown me medical documentation suggesting you may be easily influenced or confused. That documentation is fraudulent, Dr. Matthews interjected, stepping forward. I'm James Matthews, William's physician for over 30 years. I've conducted a thorough evaluation and can attest to his complete mental competence. The stroke affected his speech and mobility, not his cognitive abilities. The detective turned to Dr. Matthews. And yet another doctor has concluded otherwise. Dr. Gregory Winters has signed a formal assessment indicating significant cognitive impairment. Winters is in Carter's pocket, Elizabeth stated flatly. We have evidence of collusion. Detective Rivera raised an eyebrow. That's a serious accusation, Ms. Montgomery. I have recordings, Elizabeth said, pulling out the digital recorder, of Carter discussing his plans to commit my father to a care facility against his will so he can sell Magnolia Estate to developers. We also have evidence of financial crimes, embezzlement from Montgomery Textiles, bribery of officials, tax evasion. Rivera's professional mask didn't slip, but something shifted in her eyes. Interest, perhaps. May I hear these recordings? Elizabeth played the most incriminating portions of her conversation with Carter. When she finished, Rivera nodded thoughtfully. This is certainly concerning, but it's primarily a civil matter regarding Mr. Montgomery's care and company management. Unless. She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. Is there something more you haven't mentioned? William and Elizabeth exchanged glances. It was Francis who answered. Detective Rivera, we believe there may be a connection to Caroline Montgomery's disappearance 20 years ago. Rivera went very still. Caroline Montgomery? The missing persons case? Not just missing, Elizabeth said, handing the detective her mother's letters. Possibly in danger. These letters suggest she discovered criminal activity by my brother shortly before she disappeared. Rivera read the letters quickly, her professional demeanor never wavering, though her eyes narrowed at certain passages. When she finished, She looked up with new intensity. The Caroline Montgomery case was never officially closed, she said. It's been cold for years, but technically still open. These letters constitute new evidence. She turned to William. Sir, did you know about these letters at the time of your wife's disappearance? William shook his head, anguish clear in his eyes. Found them 3 days ago, hidden in my room. And the safety deposit box mentioned in the final letter? We plan to access it tomorrow, Elizabeth explained. Rivera considered this information, then made a decision. I'd like to accompany you to the bank. If these documents contain evidence related to a potential crime, they should be properly documented and secured. She handed her card to Elizabeth. In the meantime, I'll run a background check on Dr. Winters and look into these allegations about your brother. Carter has friends in the department, William warned, the words coming slowly but clearly. Rivera's expression hardened slightly. Perhaps he does, but I don't count myself among them. And I've been looking for a reason to re-examine the Caroline Montgomery case for a long time. After the detective left, promising to meet them at the bank in the morning, Elizabeth turned to her father. What did she mean about wanting to re-examine Mom's case? William shook his head, indicating he didn't know. Maria Rivera was a rookie officer when your mother disappeared, Francis explained. According to local gossip, she never believed the official narrative about Caroline simply leaving. But as the newest and youngest officer, and a woman of color in a department dominated by white men with deep Charleston roots, her concerns were dismissed. And now she's a detective, Elizabeth mused, with the authority to reopen the case if there's new evidence. Which we may have, Dr. Matthews added, gesturing to the letters and mentioning the safety deposit box. As night fell over Charleston, the small group continued strategizing in Francis's sitting room. William eventually dozed in his wheelchair, Duke a faithful sentinel at his side. Dr. Matthews left to prepare the legal paperwork for the morning, promising to return first thing. Elizabeth stood by the window, gazing out at the moon rising over the ancient oaks. For 15 years, she had believed her mother had abandoned them, chosen a new life over her family. For 15 years, she had been angry at her mother for leaving, at her father for letting it happen, at Carter for being the golden child who could do no wrong. Now, those certainties were crumbling, replaced by darker possibilities. Had her mother fled in genuine fear? Or had something worse happened? Something engineered by her own brother? What are you thinking? Francis asked softly, joining her at the window. That I never really knew my family at all, Elizabeth answered honestly. That every narrative I believed about us might be a lie. Francis placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Not every narrative. Your father loves you. That's never been a lie. And your mother loved you both fiercely. That truth shines through even in these painful letters. Elizabeth nodded, taking comfort in the older woman's wisdom. Tomorrow will change everything, won't it? Yes, Francis agreed, her gaze drifting to William's sleeping form and the loyal dog keeping watch. For better or worse, tomorrow brings the truth to light. As if understanding their conversation, Duke lifted his head, amber eyes gleaming in the dim light. His quiet vigilance seemed to promise protection not just for William's physical safety, but for the fragile hope now growing in the hearts of father and daughter. Hope for justice, reconciliation, and answers to questions that had haunted them for far too long. Outside, the ancient live oaks stood silent witness to the unfolding drama, their moss-draped branches swaying gently in the Charleston night. Timeless guardians of secrets both old and new. Morning broke over Charleston with the promise of heat, the air already thick with humidity as the sun climbed above the harbor. Elizabeth woke early after a restless night on Francis Cooper's guest bed, her mind churning with questions and possibilities. She showered quickly and dressed in the most professional outfit she had packed, dark jeans and a crisp white blouse, before heading downstairs. She found her father already awake in the sunroom, Duke at his side as always. William looked better than he had the day before. Some vital spark had returned to his eyes, and his posture, even in the wheelchair, seemed more commanding. He was wearing a fresh shirt and tie that Marlene must have brought from Magnolia Estate. "You look like yourself again," Elizabeth commented, leaning down to kiss his cheek. William smiled. "Feel more like myself." He gestured to the chair beside him. "Big day." Elizabeth nodded, accepting a cup of coffee from Francis, who moved quietly around the kitchen preparing breakfast. Detective Rivera will meet us at the bank at 9. Dr. Matthews is bringing the power of attorney revocation papers to file at the courthouse immediately after. And Carter? William asked, his voice stronger than it had been since his stroke. No word yet. Frances had her neighbor drive past Magnolia Estate earlier. His car was in the driveway. Elizabeth's expression hardened. He'll make his move soon. Carter doesn't like losing control of a situation. We'll be ready, William said with quiet determination. By 8:30, their small convoy was assembled. Dr. Matthews had arrived with the legal documents, which William had signed with a hand that trembled but moved with purpose. Marlene had prepared a bag with William's medications and necessities. Frances had made discreet calls to several influential Charleston residents, old friends who could potentially counter any social or political pressure Carter might apply. They traveled in 2 cars, Elizabeth driving her father in her Subaru, with Duke in the back seat, and Dr. Matthews following with Frances and Marlene. As they approached First Charleston Bank, Elizabeth noticed Detective Rivera already waiting in an unmarked police car. The detective emerged as they parked, professional in a tailored pantsuit, her badge visible on her belt. "Good morning," she greeted them. "I took the liberty of speaking with the bank manager. He's expecting us and has arranged for privacy in accessing the safety deposit box." The manager, a distinguished man named George Harrington, met them at the door. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of William Montgomery in a wheelchair, clearly not the powerful figure he remembered, but he recovered quickly, leading them to his office rather than keeping them in the public lobby. "Mr. Montgomery," he said once they were seated in private, "we'll need to verify your identity before accessing the box. I understand these are unusual circumstances." William nodded, producing his driver's license and social security card. "The box is in my wife's name, Caroline Montgomery." Harrington consulted his computer. "Yes, box number 247. In these cases, as the spouse, you would normally need to provide a death certificate to access the contents." "My mother isn't confirmed deceased," Elizabeth interjected. "She's been missing for 20 years. But presumed dead under South Carolina law after 7 years of absence," Detective Rivera added, presenting her badge. "This is now part of an active police investigation. I have a warrant to access the contents." She produced an official document, which Harrington examined carefully. "Everything appears to be in order," he conceded. "Please follow me to the vault." Duke had to remain in the manager's office with Marlene, much to the dog's visible displeasure. He whined softly as William was wheeled away, but settled when Marlene gently reminded him of his duty to guard. The bank vault was cool and silent, walls lined with metal boxes of varying sizes. Harrington led them to box number 247, inserted his key, and then looked expectantly at William. With trembling fingers, William produced a small brass key from his pocket, the one Duke had led him to find, hidden all these years in Caroline's favorite book. The manager inserted it into the second lock and turned both keys simultaneously. The box slid out smoothly. "I'll give you privacy," Harrington said, stepping back. "Detective Rivera will remain as an official witness. Please ring the bell when you're finished." He indicated a small button on the wall before departing. William stared at the metal box, suddenly hesitant. 20 years of mystery lay within, possibly answers to questions that had haunted him for 2 decades. Elizabeth placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Together, Dad," she said softly. With a nod, William lifted the lid. Inside lay several file folders, neatly labeled in Caroline Montgomery's elegant handwriting. Financial discrepancies, Wilson property, environmental reports, and finally, one labeled simply personal. Detective Rivera remained respectfully silent as William opened the first folder. It contained detailed financial records, copies of checks, bank statements, and transaction logs, all meticulously annotated in Caroline's hand, highlighting suspicious transfers and unexplained expenses. "She was building a case," Elizabeth murmured, looking over her father's shoulder, methodically documenting every questionable transaction. The second folder contained documentation about the Wilson property, the elderly neighbor whose land Carter had apparently pressured him to sell after his heart attack. Caroline had collected statements from Wilson's nurse and copies of communications showing how Carter had manipulated the situation, threatening lengthy legal battles the sick man couldn't endure. The third folder held environmental studies, an official one showing significant contamination at a proposed factory site, and a second, clearly altered version that downplayed the risks. Attached was a receipt for a large cash withdrawal from Carter's personal account, dated the day before the amended report was filed. William's hand shook visibly as he reached for the final folder, personal. Inside was a sealed envelope addressed to him, and beneath it, a small velvet jewelry pouch. He opened the envelope first, unfolding a single sheet of paper covered in Caroline's handwriting. My beloved William, if you're reading this, then you've finally discovered the truth I tried so desperately to show you. I pray it hasn't come at too high a cost. I cannot stay at Magnolia Estate any longer. Carter has made it clear that my investigations are unwelcome. His exact words were, dangerous to pursue. When I told him I would be speaking to you and the board with my findings, something changed in his eyes. I saw something I've never seen before, not even in our most difficult business adversaries, a cold calculation that frightened me to my core. I'm leaving tonight. Not forever, never forever. Just until I can find a safe way to expose what's happening without putting myself or Elizabeth at risk. I've arranged to stay with my cousin and in Vancouver. You remember her, the one who married the Canadian professor. Carter doesn't know about her. I've left my grandmother's sapphire ring in this box. Keep it safe for Elizabeth. It was meant to be hers on her 21st birthday, but I won't be there to give it to her. Perhaps someday, when this nightmare is over, you can present it to her and tell her how much I love her, how leaving her was the hardest thing I've ever done. I will contact you when I'm safely established. Please protect our daughter. Carter's ambition knows no bounds, and I fear what he might do if challenged. Trust no one until this is resolved. With eternal love, Caroline. Tears streamed down William's face as he handed the letter to Elizabeth. She read it quickly, her own eyes filling. She didn't abandon us, Elizabeth whispered. She was protecting us. William opened the small velvet pouch, tipping its contents into his palm. A stunning antique sapphire ring surrounded by diamonds. Your grandmother's ring, he said, his voice thick with emotion. For your 21st birthday. Elizabeth stared at the ring, a tangible link to the mother she had believed lost to her. But if she planned to contact you from Vancouver, why didn't she? What happened? Detective Rivera, who had been quietly taking notes, finally spoke. That's the question we need to answer. She gestured to the documents. These provide clear evidence of financial crimes and possibly bribery, but they also establish a potential motive for something more serious. You think Carter might have. Elizabeth couldn't complete the sentence. I think we need to investigate every possibility, Rivera replied carefully. According to official records, a woman matching your mother's description boarded a flight to Vancouver on June 5, 2005. But there's no record of her arrival in Canada, no border crossing under her name, or any known aliases. William's head snapped up. What are you saying? I'm saying something happened between her departure from Charleston and her anticipated arrival in Vancouver, Rivera explained. And now we have evidence suggesting your son had both motive and opportunity to ensure she never reached her destination. The implications hung heavy in the air. After a moment, William reached a decision. Take everything, he told the detective. Build your case. Rivera nodded, producing evidence bags from her briefcase. I'll document and secure each item. These will remain in police custody while we investigate. She paused, her expression softening slightly. Mr. Montgomery, I want to be clear, we don't know what happened to your wife yet. But I promise you, we will find out. As Rivera carefully cataloged the safety deposit box contents, William held the sapphire ring, turning it in his fingers before finally holding it out to Elizabeth. Should have been yours 15 years ago, he said softly. Take it now. Elizabeth hesitated, then accepted the ring, slipping it onto her right hand. The perfect fit seemed symbolic somehow, a connection restored across 20 years of loss and misunderstanding. After everything was documented and secured, they returned to the manager's office where Duke greeted William with obvious relief, pressing against his legs and scanning his face as if checking for signs of distress. What happens next? Elizabeth asked Detective Rivera as they prepared to leave the bank. I'm taking these documents directly to the district attorney's office, Rivera explained. Given the nature of the evidence and Mr. Montgomery's position in the community, this will be handled carefully. I've already requested phone and travel records from June 2005. She lowered her voice. I should warn you, Your brother will likely be brought in for questioning today. William nodded grimly. He won't come quietly. Few suspects do, Rivera acknowledged. But the evidence is substantial. At minimum, we have financial crimes. At worst. She didn't finish the sentence. Outside the bank, as they prepared to head to the courthouse to file the power of attorney revocation, Elizabeth's phone rang. The screen showed Francis Cooper's name. Francis? We're just leaving the bank now. Elizabeth began, but the older woman's urgent voice cut her off. Carter is here, Francis said, her normally composed tone strained. He arrived with Dr. Winters and 2 security guards. He's demanding to see William, claiming he's acting in his father's best interest. He's threatening to call for an emergency psychiatric hold. Elizabeth's blood ran cold. Stall him. We're on our way. She turned to the others. Carter's at Francis's house with reinforcements. We need to get there now. The drive back to Francis's home took less than 10 minutes, but to Elizabeth, it felt like hours. When they arrived, they found Carter's Jaguar and an unmarked van parked in the driveway. Detective Rivera pulled up behind them, speaking rapidly into her radio. Stay in the car until I assess the situation, Rivera instructed, her hand moving instinctively to her service weapon. No, William said firmly. My house, my son, my confrontation. Before anyone could stop him, he had unbuckled his seatbelt and was opening the car door. Duke immediately leapt from the back seat to stand beside his wheelchair. Elizabeth hurried to help her father, while Dr. Matthews quickly joined them. The front door opened as they approached, revealing Francis standing defiantly in the doorway, blocking Carter's exit. There you are, Carter called out, his voice carrying across the garden. He stepped past Francis onto the porch, immaculately dressed in a designer suit that seemed to armor him against the humid Charleston morning. I've been concerned, Dad. Disappearing from home, missing your medications. His solicitous tone didn't match the cold calculation in his eyes. William wheeled himself forward, Duke at his side. No need for concern. I'm exactly where I want to be. Carter's gaze shifted to Detective Rivera, who was approaching with measured steps, her badge visible. Detective, what brings you here? Has there been some sort of complaint? You could say that, Rivera replied evenly. Mr. Carter Montgomery, I have some questions regarding documents we've recovered from a safety deposit box belonging to your mother. Something flickered in Carter's expression, a momentary crack in his composed facade. He recovered quickly. My mother has been gone for 20 years, Detective. I'm not sure what relevance old documents could possibly have now. They have considerable relevance to an ongoing investigation into financial irregularities at Montgomery Textiles, Rivera countered, as well as to your mother's disappearance. Carter laughed, the sound brittle and forced. Disappearance? My mother abandoned her family. She ran off with her tennis instructor. It was a scandal my father paid good money to keep quiet. That's a lie, Williams said, his voice stronger and clearer than it had been since his stroke. Your mother found evidence of your crimes. She was fleeing for her safety. Crimes? This is absurd. Carter turned to Dr. Winters, who hovered uncertainly behind him. Dr. Winters, please explain my father's condition to these people. The doctor stepped forward, clutching his medical bag like a shield. Mr. Montgomery has exhibited signs of paranoia and confabulation since his stroke. He creates conspiracy theories and false memories, particularly regarding family members. That assessment is fraudulent, Dr. Matthews interjected, stepping forward with a folder of his own. I have documented William's mental competence extensively, and as of this morning, we are filing to revoke Carter's power of attorney. Carter's controlled expression finally slipped, revealing naked fury. This is ridiculous. My father is ill. He needs professional care, not enablers feeding his delusions. He signaled to the 2 men waiting by the van. These gentlemen are from Pinewood Care Facility. They're here to escort my father to a safe environment where he can receive proper treatment. Duke growled low in his throat, positioning himself protectively in front of William's wheelchair. The security guards hesitated, eyeing the German shepherd warily. Detective Rivera moved to stand beside William. No one is going anywhere, Mr. Montgomery. In fact, I'd like you to accompany me to the station to answer some questions. On what grounds? Carter demanded. Initially, to discuss evidence of embezzlement, bribery, and document falsification, Rivera stated calmly. Potentially, to discuss your knowledge of Caroline Montgomery's movements after she left Charleston on June 5, 2005. For the first time, genuine fear flashed across Carter's face. You're suggesting, what exactly, detective? I'm not suggesting anything yet, Rivera replied. I'm investigating all possibilities. Carter's composure crumbled entirely. He pointed accusingly at Elizabeth. This is your doing. You've never accepted your place in this family. Always jealous, always undermining me with Dad. His voice rose hysterically. You couldn't stand that he chose me to run the company instead of you. He didn't choose you, Elizabeth said quietly. You manipulated him, just like you manipulated everyone. You drove Mom away, possibly worse, and you've been systematically dismantling everything Dad built. You know nothing about business. Carter shouted. Montgomery Textiles was dying. Those mills were outdated, inefficient. They employed 300 Charleston families. William interrupted, his eyes fixed on his son. Families that depended on us, that trusted us. Sentiment is a luxury we couldn't afford, Carter snapped. Business is about profit, not people. That was never my philosophy, William said sadly. And it was never meant to be the Montgomery legacy. Something dangerous shifted in Carter's expression. He looked from William to Elizabeth to Detective Rivera, like a cornered animal calculating its escape. Suddenly, he lunged forward, shoving past Rivera toward William's wheelchair. Duke reacted instantly, leaping between them with a thunderous bark. Carter stumbled backward, nearly falling down the porch steps. The security guards moved forward uncertainly, but froze when Rivera's hand moved to her weapon. Carter Montgomery, Rivera said formally, I'm placing you under investigative detention regarding financial crimes against Montgomery Textiles and potential involvement in the disappearance of Caroline Montgomery. You have the right to remain silent. As the detective continued reading him his rights, Carter's face contorted with rage and desperation. For a moment, Elizabeth thought he might try to flee, but the fight suddenly seemed to drain from him. His shoulders slumped as Rivera gently took his arm, guiding him toward her vehicle. This isn't over, he called back to William and Elizabeth. You'll never prove anything. Never. As Rivera placed Carter in her car, Dr. Winters and the security guards quickly retreated to their van, unwilling to be associated with whatever was unfolding. In the sudden quiet of Francis's garden, William reached for Elizabeth's hand. It's begun, he said softly. The reckoning. Elizabeth knelt beside her father's wheelchair, Duke pressing close on his other side. Yes, she agreed, the sapphire ring on her finger catching the morning light. But whatever happens next, we face it together. William nodded, gazing after the departing police car with a mixture of grief and resolution. Together, he echoed, one hand on his daughter's shoulder, the other buried in Duke's fur, drawing strength from the unlikely family that fate had restored to him. Behind them, Francis and Marlene watched from the porch, witnesses to the collapse of one Montgomery legacy and the possible beginning of another. One built on truth rather than deception, on healing rather than harm. The reckoning had indeed begun, but so had the healing. 5 months later, the gardens of Magnolia Estate bloomed with late October roses, their fragrance mingling with the earthy scent of fallen leaves. The golden afternoon light filtered through ancient oaks, casting dappled shadows across the immaculate lawn where white chairs had been arranged in neat rows. A simple archway, draped with magnolia blossoms and white roses, stood at the head of a makeshift aisle. Elizabeth Montgomery stood at the window of her childhood bedroom, watching as the final preparations took place below. She wore a simple cream-colored dress, her mother's sapphire ring gleaming on her right hand, her honey-blonde hair swept into an elegant updo adorned with a single magnolia flower. You look beautiful, Marlene said, entering with a small bouquet of white roses. Just like your mother on her wedding day. Thank you, Elizabeth replied, accepting the flowers. How's Dad doing? Marlene smiled. Strong as an ox. You wouldn't believe it's the same man from 6 months ago. He walked all the way around the garden this morning with just his cane, Duke right beside him, of course. Of course, Elizabeth echoed with a fond smile. The German Shepherd had become such an integral part of their lives that it was hard to imagine Magnolia Estate without him padding through its halls, maintaining his watchful vigilance over William. A soft knock at the door heralded Frances Cooper's arrival. The elegant older woman entered, resplendent in a lavender suit and matching hat. "The guests are seated," she announced, "and your father is ready whenever you are." Elizabeth took a deep breath. "Then I guess it's time." Downstairs, the grand foyer of Magnolia Estate had been transformed. Fresh flowers adorned every surface. Family photographs, long banished during Carter's reign, had been restored to their places of honor, and the scent of lemon oil on centuries-old wood gave the house a renewed vitality. William Montgomery waited at the foot of the stairs, standing tall with only the assistance of an elegant ebony cane. At 79, he had regained much of his former vigor. His speech, while still occasionally halting, had improved dramatically with intensive therapy. The physical transformation was remarkable, but the change in his spirit was even more profound. A weight had been lifted, replaced by a hard-won peace. Beside him stood Duke, now officially recognized as a therapy dog, wearing a dignified blue bandana for the occasion. The German shepherd's coat gleamed with health, his intelligent eyes constantly scanning the environment, a habit he had never abandoned, even as life at Magnolia Estate had settled into tranquility. "Elizabeth," William breathed as his daughter descended the stairs. "You're the image of your mother." She embraced him carefully, mindful of his still recovering balance. "Ready, Dad?" He nodded, offering his arm with old-world grace. More than ready. Together, with Duke walking sedately beside them, they made their way through the house and out onto the back terrace. As they approached the garden ceremony, the small gathering of guests rose to their feet. The assembly was intimate. Loyal employees of Montgomery Textiles, old family friends who had stood by them through the scandal, Dr. Matthews and his wife, and a few new faces who had entered their lives during the tumultuous past months. At the archway waited James Taylor, a kind-faced man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and gentle eyes, Elizabeth's business partner from her bookstore in Asheville, and now, something more. Beside him stood a justice of the peace, ready to officiate. It wasn't a traditional wedding by Charleston standards. No elaborate cathedral ceremony, no hundreds of society guests, no extravagant reception. Just a simple, heartfelt exchange of vows in the gardens that had witnessed generations of Montgomery history, both tragic and triumphant. William guided Elizabeth to the archway, then stepped aside after kissing her cheek. Duke settled at his feet as he took his seat in the front row, pride evident in his face as he watched his daughter join hands with the man who had supported her through the darkest days of the past months. As the ceremony proceeded, Elizabeth found her thoughts drifting momentarily to the journey that had brought them to this moment of joy. The investigation into Carter's crimes had uncovered far more than anyone had anticipated. Financial forensic accountants had traced the embezzlement back nearly 2 decades, millions siphoned through elaborate shell companies and offshore accounts. The environmental violations alone would have been enough to secure significant penalties, but they were just the beginning. Detective Rivera's dogged investigation into Caroline Montgomery's disappearance had yielded the most shocking revelations. Phone records and flight manifests had confirmed that Caroline had indeed boarded a flight to Vancouver, but never arrived. Instead, a private charter had been booked under a company name later traced to one of Carter's shell corporations, a charter from the connecting airport in Atlanta to a small airfield in the Cayman Islands, where Carter had maintained a vacation property unknown to the rest of the family. No body had been found, but the circumstantial evidence was damning. Carter, facing mounting evidence of his financial crimes, had eventually offered a plea deal. Full confession to the embezzlement and bribery charges in exchange for immunity from prosecution regarding Caroline's disappearance. The district attorney had rejected the offer. Carter Montgomery now awaited trial from a cell in the Charleston County Detention Center, bail denied due to his substantial resources and flight risk. The once proud heir to the Montgomery legacy had fallen spectacularly, his carefully constructed facade of respectability shattered beyond repair. Yet even in the midst of such darkness, light had emerged. Montgomery Textiles had survived, restructured under the guidance of a board now led by Elizabeth herself, who had discovered that her business acumen had not diminished during her years away. The historic headquarters building downtown had been saved from developers, and the mills, modernized but not outsourced, continued to provide employment to hundreds of Charleston families. Magnolia Estate had been restored to its former glory, no longer a mausoleum to faded grandeur, but a living, breathing home once more. The gardens that Caroline had loved so dearly bloomed again under the care of Harold and a team of dedicated groundskeepers. And most miraculous of all, William Montgomery had found his way back to health and strength, with Duke as his constant companion and Elizabeth as his steadfast ally. Do you, Elizabeth Caroline Montgomery, take James Michael Taylor to be your lawfully wedded husband? The justice's words drew Elizabeth back to the present moment. She looked into James's kind eyes, the man who had driven down from Asheville the moment she called, who had helped her sort through decades of Montgomery financial records, who had sat with William for hours discussing books and history, while Elizabeth dealt with lawyers and police. "I do," she said clearly. As they exchanged rings and the justice pronounced them husband and wife, a sudden breeze stirred the magnolia blossoms overhead, sending a shower of white petals swirling around them. From his place beside William, Duke lifted his head, amber eyes tracking the dancing petals with curious attention. The small gathering moved to the terrace for a simple reception. Tables had been set with the Montgomery family silver and china, crystal glasses catching the late afternoon sunlight. A string quartet played softly in the background, and the catering staff, led by a local restaurant that had been a Montgomery family favorite for generations, circulated with trays of Southern delicacies. Elizabeth and James moved among their guests, accepting congratulations and well wishes. When they reached William, seated in a comfortable chair with Duke at his side, Elizabeth leaned down to embrace her father. "Happy, Dad?" she asked softly. "More than I deserve to be," he replied, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "Your mother would be so proud of you. Of us." Elizabeth squeezed his hand. "I believe she knows somehow." William nodded, then gestured to James. "Take care of my daughter," he said, his speech clear and deliberate. "She's the best of the Montgomery line." "I know exactly how fortunate I am, sir," James replied sincerely, resting a hand on Elizabeth's shoulder. As dusk began to fall, lanterns illuminated the garden, casting a warm glow over the gathering. The cake was cut, toasts were made, and soon couples began to dance on the small floor that had been set up near the quartet. Detective Rivera, who had become an unexpected friend throughout the investigation, approached Elizabeth during a quiet moment. "Congratulations," she said, elegant in a simple navy dress that contrasted with her usual professional attire. "It's good to see Magnolia Estate filled with joy again." "Thank you for everything," Elizabeth replied sincerely. "We wouldn't be here without your dedication to finding the truth." Rivera's expression grew serious. "I wanted to let you know, we've received approval to conduct a search of the Cayman Islands property next month. We haven't given up." Elizabeth nodded, grateful for the detective's continued commitment to finding answers about her mother's fate. "Whatever you discover, we want to know. The truth matters, no matter how painful. You'll be the first call I make," Rivera promised before moving away to allow other guests to approach the bride. As the evening progressed, Elizabeth noticed her father beckoning to her from the edge of the terrace. She excused herself from a conversation with Dr. Matthews and made her way to William's side. "What is it, Dad?" William smiled mysteriously. "Come with me. Something to show you." Intrigued, Elizabeth followed as her father walked slowly but steadily toward his study, Duke padding faithfully alongside. James joined them, offering William a supportive arm when the elderly man hesitated at the stairs, but William waved him off. "I can manage," he said with determination, getting stronger every day. In the study, restored to its former warmth with leather-bound books and family photographs, William moved to his desk and unlocked a drawer. From inside, he withdrew a large envelope. "Wedding present," he explained, handing it to Elizabeth. "Should have done this months ago, but wanted to wait for the right moment." Elizabeth opened the envelope, James looking on curiously over her shoulder. Inside was a stack of legal documents. As she read the first page, her eyes widened. "Dad, these are ownership papers for Montgomery Textiles and Magnolia Estate, with my name on them." William nodded. "Transfer of majority ownership. Effective immediately." He smiled at her stunned expression. "The Montgomery legacy belongs to you now, Elizabeth. You'll honor it better than I did." "But Dad, you've been doing so well with the company since." William raised a hand to stop her. "I've had my time. Made my mistakes. Nearly lost everything that mattered." He glanced at Duke, who had settled at his feet. "Time for new leadership. someone with both business sense and heart. Tears filled Elizabeth's eyes. This symbolic transfer represented more than just legal ownership. It was William's final act of trust, his acknowledgement of the daughter he had once failed to recognize. "What about new chapter?" James asked gently, referring to Elizabeth's bookstore. "You've built something wonderful there too." Elizabeth looked between her father and her husband, emotion welling in her throat. I think there's a way to honor both legacies. The bookstore could open a Charleston location, perhaps in part of the downtown headquarters building. A way to blend the old and new, to honor tradition while creating something fresh. William's face lit up. Perfect. Exactly what Montgomery Textiles needs. Innovation with respect for tradition. They were interrupted by Duke, who suddenly stood alert, ears perked toward the study door. A moment later, Marlene appeared, slightly breathless. "Miss Elizabeth, there's someone here to see you. Says she's come a very long way." The housekeeper's expression was unreadable, but there was something in her voice that sent a chill down Elizabeth's spine. "Who is it?" she asked, setting the documents on the desk. "She says." Marlene hesitated, her voice dropping to a whisper. "She says she's Caroline Montgomery." The world seemed to stop. Elizabeth felt James's steadying hand on her back as she stared at Marlene in disbelief. William gripped the edge of his desk, his face draining of color. "That's impossible," Elizabeth whispered. "That's what I thought," Marlene replied. "But Miss Elizabeth, she has your grandmother's emerald earrings. The ones only your mother would have." William was already moving toward the door, his cane forgotten in his haste. Elizabeth and James followed, with Duke racing ahead, as if sensing the momentous nature of what awaited them. In the foyer stood a slender woman with silver blonde hair cut in a stylish bob. She wore simple, elegant clothes and carried herself with quiet dignity despite the obvious tension in her posture. As she turned toward their approach, Elizabeth felt her heart stop. Despite the passage of 20 years, despite the lines of age and experience now marking her face, it was unmistakably Caroline Montgomery. Duke reached her first, circling her cautiously, sniffing with intense concentration. The woman stood perfectly still, allowing his inspection. After a moment, to everyone's astonishment, the German shepherd sat at her feet, looking up at her with what could only be described as approval. "Caroline," William breathed, frozen in the doorway. The woman's eyes, the same blue that Elizabeth saw in her mirror every day, filled with tears. "William, I never thought I'd see you again." Elizabeth couldn't move, couldn't speak. 20 years of grief, anger, and confusion collided with the impossible reality before her. James squeezed her hand supportively as Duke looked back at them, as if to confirm his assessment of this newcomer. "How?" William asked, the single word containing a universe of questions. Caroline Montgomery, for there could be no doubt it was her, glanced toward the still open front door where guests from the wedding reception were beginning to gather, drawn by the commotion. "It's a long story," she said softly. "One I've waited 20 years to tell." She looked at Elizabeth, her expression a mixture of hope and fear. "If you're willing to hear it." Elizabeth felt as if she were in a dream, but Duke's calm acceptance of this woman somehow anchored her to reality. The dog who had protected her father so fiercely, who had uncovered hidden truths and guarded against deception, had welcomed this stranger without hesitation. "I think," Elizabeth said finally, finding her voice, "that it's time for truth in this house." "All of it." Caroline nodded gratefully, then noticed Elizabeth's wedding attire and the gathering behind her. "I've interrupted your wedding day. I'm so sorry, I didn't know." "Perhaps," Francis Cooper suggested, stepping forward from the curious onlookers, "this conversation should happen privately. The guests will understand." William finally moved forward, each step deliberate, until he stood directly before the woman who had vanished from his life 2 decades earlier. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, the years falling away between them. Then, with gentle dignity, William extended his hand. After a heartbeat's hesitation, Caroline took it. "Welcome home," he said simply. As the guests returned to the garden reception, shepherded tactfully by Francis and Marlene, the Montgomery family, old and new, lost and found, gathered in the sitting room that had witnessed countless family dramas throughout the generations. Duke positioned himself in the center of the group, as if accepting his role as witness to this extraordinary reunion. Outside, The Charleston night deepened, stars appearing one by one above Magnolia Estate. The grand old house, which had weathered hurricanes and wars, scandals and losses, now held within its walls a new chapter in the Montgomery story, one of reconciliation, renewal, and unexpected second chances. And at the heart of it all was Duke, the abandoned German shepherd who had appeared seemingly from nowhere to stand guard over an elderly man in a wheelchair. A dog whose loyalty had become the catalyst for truth, whose protective instinct had sparked a chain of events that would eventually bring healing to a broken family. As Caroline began her story, a tale of fear and flight, of years spent in hiding after narrowly escaping what she believed was her son's attempt on her life, Duke settled at William's feet, his watchful gaze moving from face to face, guardian and witness to the final act of the drama he had helped set in motion. The Montgomery legacy, nearly destroyed by greed and deception, had come full circle, not to where it had begun, but to something new and stronger, built on the foundations of truth that Duke had helped uncover. Outside, the music from the reception continued to play, a fitting soundtrack to the extraordinary scene unfolding within. Life at Magnolia Estate would never be the same, but perhaps, at last, it could be whole. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and if you watched this far, comment, "I watched all the way through," and share your thoughts about this story. Oh, and don't forget to watch the next video that appears in the end screen. It's very exciting.